At its core, Insight Myanmar is about connection. We strive to bridge divides and foster understanding by sharing the stories of those living through extraordinary times. Connection fuels empathy, and empathy inspires action. So whether it's through tales of spirituality, reflections on cultural heritage, or accounts of people's struggles against oppression and their aspirations for a better future, we aim to forge connections towards a shared humanity that transcends borders. Let's start to build on that connection with the interview that follows.
All right, so very nice to chat with you today. So my name is Bhanubhatra Jittiang. I'm the assistant professor of political science at Chulalongkorn Universities, and also the director of the Nelson Mandela Centers for Conflict Resolution, Atrocity Prevention, and Human Securities as well at the same faculties. So my whole career that I've been building at the universities has been focusing mainly on refugees issues, and that's what I've been teaching and working on. Also looking specifically into humanitarianisms and also issue related to humanitarian affairs as well as international development and conflict. Certainly right now as we see what happened in Myanmar, that's how I got engaged and also learn from, in starting my whole work.
Well, it's great to be able to speak to you, and I look forward to this conversation. And as we talked about just before we started recording, it's become very interesting for me and hopefully our listeners, the wide range of views on Myanmar that we see in Thailand. And Thailand being such an important neighbor, a 2,400 kilometer border that's being shared, I think it's really important for, as we're trying to understand Myanmar, so also do we have to understand the region, and so also do we have to understand how different voices in Thailand are looking at it. And I think, your voice and your perspectives are going to contrast with other voices we've had on here, which is great to be able to see this wide range. And so during this conversation, we are looking forward to getting more deeply involved in your perspective and study. And to start us off, why don't you tell us where it all began? How did you first start to become interested in Myanmar and first start to be engaged?
Yeah, I think that you are correct when we're talking about Myanmar. I think it's really important that we understand it from the regional standpoint because of we cannot just take one country and then put it in a separate directions from other countries because of it share a long border. Actually, it's 2,401 kilometers. So you missed 1 kilometer. But I think the reason why we emphasize a lot on this because of that means that we have a really long border that we are sharing both on land. At the same time, we also share certain maritime border as well together with Myanmar. And this is important because of that means that, Myanmar cut across various terrain from the southern part of Thailand all the way to the northern part of Thailand as well. And for that reason, of course, Thailand as a frontier country, it become really important because of whatever happened in Myanmar, it does have a direct impact on Thailand and certainly. So with regards to Myanmar, how do I get involved with the issue of Myanmar? Well, actually, I have to trace back to the time when I was studying about refugees, when I was a graduate student. So that was 2016, around that time, when I was started first to look into the situation related to the Rohingya people. As one of the key groups, because of that are the groups of people, refugees that we also experience within the regions, and Thailand really have to engage. But to look at Rohingya specifically, no, I did not. What I did at that time was focus more on the Thai refugee policies. Nevertheless, as time gone by, the situation in Myanmar changed with the coup in 2021. And that sort of bring me more closer into the study about the refugee dynamics along the border, because previously my work has been focusing a lot more on the urban refugees in the urban setting, particularly in Bangkok, including some of those from the Rohingya community. But once the coup happened, what happened was that things changed even for myself. So I started to go more regularly to understand the dynamic of the refugee at the border, and then but still looking from the Thai perspective. And then when I go to the border areas, one thing that I was troubled was there are lots of groups involved. And I still remember the first few times I was doing a field work in Mesot. I have to hold a list of acronyms because I cannot remember all the names of the groups at that time. So that was 2021. And since then, once you start working on refugee issue, we have to see the refugee issue not at the end of the stories. It was more like at how it was the entry point for me to actually learn more about the country and the conflict, and at the same time different dynamics that different groups involved. And from there, that's why Thailand is a transit countries and so on, but for me it's an entry point to learn more about Myanmar. And from 2021 until now, that's when I start to actually working on Myanmar. And then they are saying that once you start working on Myanmar, you cannot really leave because of their changing dynamic almost all the time. And since then, that's why I grapple with this issue most of the time. Ever since, yeah.
Right. What's interesting is that because you're Thai and grew up in Thailand, Myanmar's always been right there.
Yeah.
Myanmar migrants and refugees have always been flooding in, sometimes more, sometimes less, into Thailand. And so, before you were advancing in your academic career, you must have had some kind of perception or knowledge, however vague, of something that was going on here to the West that was affecting our society and country. And so, can you describe, pre-academic, what were your perceptions of that? And then, as you started to get into the academic work, did it affirm perceptions and things you were thinking, or did it challenge them? And what was that process like for you?
I think this is a really interesting question because of I grew up in Thailand, right? So within the Thai societies, it's been known for a long time that we always have history been shaped by dynamics of the relations between Thailand and Myanmar, in the sense of we always go at war. It is historically during the Ayutthaya period, etc., etc. And then in our real life, we meet with people from Myanmar almost all the time because of the dynamics of things. And people that work in several places, food court and different other areas, they are mostly from Myanmar as well. So actually that kind of encounter is always there. But when you think about people, that's one thing, right? But if you think about the country itself, that's another thing. What we know normally from a Thai perspective, even myself as an academic, was that Myanmar, well, perhaps we know about some different ethnic groups, but the differences between them, we don't really know. And then we also see Myanmar most of the time from the angle of seeing that, there's a central administrations, right? Now it's known as federal, but we don't see it in the sense of having a federalism just like in other cases, in the US or in Canada or some other countries that have a federal system as well. So it's sort of you're reflecting the state of Myanmar as more like the Thai state in a way, because of Thailand is centralized, right? So you would see it from that lens. Now, when you started working on Myanmar, when I started to do all the work and research, what I found was that the number one thing that changed for me is that it's not what I was thinking.
Really?
Because I was like it's more complex. As I said, early on, right? I have to have the scripts. I don't have it here with me, but normally I carry the whole list of all the acronyms.
Must be a long list.
And then because it keeps adding on, basically, right? So what happened was that with that list, it really allows me to see the complexities of Myanmar. That's one thing. Second thing, I learned more about the minority within the minorities, and that are the dynamics that I never seen most of the time, even though Myanmar is there, because we assume that even there are major ethnic cities, well, within the same ethnic groups, there are other ethnic groups within it, right? Subgroups and so on. So those are things that I think I started to learn. And not only that, but we also see that, the countries that we thought could be unified, it's not the case, right? Because of, not that they cannot unify, but because of there are lots of differences among different groups that are also clear. And one thing that for example, I just give you one quick example from my own. When you talk about Karen and Karani, right? In Thai language, it's the same groups, right? You use the same term, Kariang, right? But then when you are really working together with them, well, there are distinctions between the two groups as well. So those are some of the example that it's become quite clear to me once I started working that there are more diversities within the groups, and then there are not simply just a fragmentation itself, but there are many other groups and many layers of understanding. So that complexity is something I only reflected after working on Myanmar. And I think that complexity is something that really embedded in what we are seeing unfolding in the country at the moment as well.
And I think that complexity that you described, which is so accurate, I think it's as you say, it's this kind of never-ending journey of peeling back layers of the onion to keep learning about the subcategories and subcategories and subcategories, and then sometimes the opposite of that, how two groups are actually linked together in ways you wouldn't predict, and the acronyms that are joining together and breaking off and forming new ones and everything else. And it makes me think how much work it takes to be able to even have a vague understanding of this, and yet for a country now in crisis, you have international actors trying to engage. How many of them even have the basic level of proper understanding? And if we're looking specifically at Thai-Burmese relations, those different Thai elements and actors that are engaging, what are they understanding and misunderstanding about the complexity of Myanmar, and how is that driving some of their decision-making process, and what are the results of that? That's a very complex soup that you then start to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. I think you are correct. I mean, particularly when we look at these complexities, right? If you don't treat Myanmar issue as being complex to begin with, then you're gonna try to find some very easy and simple solutions that we're gonna be able to bring peace, right away by having everyone at the table. The question is, who are going to be at the table to begin with? Because there are so many groups, and some of the groups are not allies. And how would you come up with those processes and so on? Even though there are templates or there are ways that people were thinking that this is a possible or a plausible model, right? But in fact, when you started to apply, you will realize that maybe this doesn't work, So I think because of that, it's really important to not simplify the situation in Myanmar. I think that's what I learned. And second thing, not simplify, but we need to tackle that complexities with the complex understanding of the situations. Because if we keep trying to simplify it, to boil it down, just simply to have the formation of nation states in the way that people are thinking, then we are losing the essentials of all elements that are involved in this. I'm not saying this to romanticize, the conflict or whatever, but I feel that to solve this conflict, it's not simply just about solving the conflict, but it's to understand the conflict to begin with. What are you dealing with? And I think that complexity, it's one of the things that, from my perspective and observation, is that several of the people that try to involve with Myanmar do not understand, or at least do not be able to speak that same language with the same commonalities. And I have to admit as well, even myself, sometimes when you get distracted from Myanmar issue for quite some times, and you come back to work on it, I would say just 2 to 3 weeks, things change. And that means that what is no longer updated anymore. So it requires a constant updates of your knowledge with regards to Myanmar and the situation on the ground. And I think this is something that is really important for us to really move forward to formulate a better pathway even. I'm not going to use the term solution, but pathway for any dialogue or anything to actually take place within the countries.
And I would add to that a constant update of asking the right people, because as with you, as with me, I'm sure as in the case with you, there are a certain number of very reliable people that I always turn to say, well, whoa, tell me what's going on with this, tell me what's happening with that. And the reason I've come to turn to those people is that they've informed me. Sometimes the international community will land on a narrative or a certain voice or a certain action, and the international community will misunderstand something en masse, that a lot of the Burmese people on the ground will all see that it's a different way, but there's this incredible parallel conversations where they're not talking to each other. And so, there are a number of key, reliable local voices that I'm constantly turning to say, whoa, tell me, what was the case with this? What was with that? To check in, with the right people, not just with the people that are mouthpieces, but are not necessarily, knowing that. And another thing I'd add on to what you said is, you were describing the complexity of it, and that's where I had to smile when you were saying it, because it makes me think of why we do what we do on our podcast. We have 2-hour conversations with any number of informed actors. We're up to something like 17 days of continuous listening if you were to start from number 1 and to number whatever, and we constantly get requests from listeners. I don't have all this time. Can't you give me like the highlights of it, or can you do shorter interviews? And I say, well, no, that's why we do what we do, because we are not going to turn it reductionist. If we do a long form interview and then simplify that interview, we're doing the exact thing we're trying not to. We're saying, if you want to understand, this is the process you need to go through of bringing in this information and trying to put it together, and not simplifying it down and kind of wading in that complexity, because when you don't do that, that's where you get these reductionist easy solutions of, and I want to go back to the other thing you said, which is, which I also had to smile at, because I've been hearing this a lot in Thailand, and I've been hearing it from some Western actors as well, which is this sense where it's like, oh my gosh, are we in 2015 again? Are we in 1991 again? Like, because we keep hearing it. We just need to bring people to the table. We just need to have everyone sit down and be able to talk. And then when you start asking, well, who are you inviting? Who are you not inviting? What is the representative of this group? How are you going to sort this out? Are you really going to ask on one side an opposition or resistance or democratic force to sit down with their rapists, with their terrorists, with their murderers, and trust them that this time, after all the other times of them flouting the whatever it was they agreed to, this time we can trust them because, we have to do that. And, so it just seems like we always, we kind of end back where we started in many cases.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing, every situations, every period of times, it's always different, right? We can not always go back and say, this is like we're going back to the day again. Yeah, there might be something that are similarities, right? But there are lots of differences that we have to grapple. So I think that from there, that's why, when we talk and try to unpack, or even myself try to learn and unpack about Myanmar situations right now, it's really need to go from that particular direction, and then without that complexities, without unpacking that complexities itself, I wouldn't be able to come up or think about other thing else. Like, for example, including humanitarian assistance and other areas of work that I've been doing and involving. I think this is something that is quite important. That's why, and it's with these complexities, it really allows you to really get insights into a frank conversation. And I think you need that in the context of what happened in Myanmar right now, because of if you're not talking about what is actually happening, then we are at risk of not doing or not being able to do anything at all. Because of eventually, even though you have a good intentions to do things, but if you hit it at a wrong point or a wrong button, then it's gonna go wrong completely, right? So in that sense, I think it's really important that to retain that complexities as we move forward, and then how to see things coming together afterwards and so on.
Yeah, and I think that similar to the Middle East, every generation of American president seems to want to be the one to bring a simple form of peace to the Middle East, thinking they're going to solve the crisis. I think that Myanmar also has a similar tendency to have new international actors come in and just think they're the ones that are going to be able to figure all this out and sit everyone down and come to a resolution that's actually going to last, not understanding that complexity. And so I want to go back to one thing you just said, where you were referencing how the need to have frank conversations, that sometimes you need to sit someone down and you need to tell them what's what, at least as far as your background and study is trying to correct certain narratives. And I want to ask if there's any example of that you can give where you had to have that heart-to-heart or frank conversation trying to correct what you felt was an incorrect or a diluted narrative.
I think one of the things that I think it's really important for me is it's just the understanding of Myanmar. As I told you before at the beginning of the podcast, right? So people still see Myanmar in Thailand as, particularly in the policy circle, as being a state that is more like Thailand, meaning that it's still centralized, right? So if you see from the engagement between Thailand and Myanmar, people always wonder like why it's always focused on on the military regime and so on. But the question is, you have to see it from how Thailand is seeing things and look at things, right? Because of Thailand is a state where it's a centralized, and then the bureaucracy at the center can actually do many things, reach out to the borders and then do other kind of foreign affairs and so on. So when they are operating, so when these official bureaucrats operating, they're operating from that standpoint, right? So when they look in Myanmar, who would be the first point of engagement if they were to actually doing it officially? Then in that case, whoever controlled the capital.
Yeah.
And where is the capital, right? I mean, it's Naypyidaw or Yangon in the past, right? Then that means that it's a regime there, whatever regime that is, right? So in that sense, to start to make corrections or have a frank conversation, it just starts from there. That in the case of Myanmar, well, we are not talking about the state that is centralized, like what we see. We are seeing the states with our many form of small states that are trying to come together, and the center is trying to force them to come together. And that's how we see the form of repressions over the years and so on and so forth, that as we've seen in history as well. But what we are seeing, we need to actually correct it to people, is that this is not a centralized states. This is a decentralized state, more or less. And at the same time, you can even say that it's a fragmented state. But now some of my colleagues even say that stateless itself become the emerging form of state, right? So this is, I think, kind of the trajectory that we are seeing. So when we are talking to policy makers in the context of Thailand, or even I think ASEAN at large as well, maybe this is a kind of conversation we need to correct them. Because if they're not seeing it from this angle, right, that means their engagement will likely be centered around maybe the groups of the regimes in Naypyidaw, and that was it. But while in fact there are other groups, many other groups that are out there that needs engagement, and those direct engagement are even more important. Right? Yeah. Thinking about the Thai interest, for example, right? The most important thing is when we talk about it, 2,401 kilometers, right? These different groups are the ones that are at the border. And if you're talking about border security as the interest of Thailand, engagement with all these different groups along the borders are so important.
Yeah.
So the question is not about engaging with the center alone, but it's a engagement with all these different other states and sub-states that are located there. So I think this is one of the things that it needs corrections. So that's one of the examples that I would give. The second example that I would also give is that, it's the perceptions about, because of when we are illustrating in, let's say, like ASEAN in general, right? You always see something like, okay, we have a national costume and those kind of things. But which particular groups they represented, right? And most of the time we see the majority, and that's Burma, right? Well, in fact, in the case of Myanmar, there are many other groups that the national costume would be diverse. It would be different from groups to groups. Right. And I think this is a very basic thing. It seems very basic, but why do you have to understand or even have to explain these basic things for many people? Because without that understanding to begin with. Yeah. It means that you cannot go on to other conversations. And even if you go on to other conversations, those conversations will likely tend to boil down to simplified form of how we're going to engage, particularly with, a center, which is a majority, right? Well, in fact, it may not represent the whole of the nation itself. Yeah.
And often you hear these kind of arcane references pointing to that diversity. I mean, you often hear there are 135 different ethnicities. Well, that number doesn't really mean anything. I mean, actually, there's even a theory that number, 135, 1 plus 3 plus 5 equals 9. 9 is a lucky number. There's even a theory that was fabricated as kind of an auspicious thing, and it hasn't really been since the British colonial period that they were using their racialized techniques to go and do studies. And there have been studies across Myanmar, anthropological studies that haven't taken place since the British colonial days. ways. And so what do we actually know about what this makeup is? And I think that when we look at the just how diverse it is and how we try to understand the nature of that diversity, and you mentioned where Thailand would engage with it. And it's interesting you mentioned about the national dress and the different the different groups and compared to Thailand, because I'm remembering that I had a recent conversation with the milk tea activist from Thailand, Pup. And she referenced how she was kind of criticizing and laughing at this Thai belief that Thailand had never been colonized, because in her view, she was saying Thailand colonized itself. Her coming from Isan, she's, we were brought into a culture and language and system that wasn't ours. We were oppressed. And I think that, that's a microcosm of, or that's a we could almost say a mild example, not to put, Pup's marginalization mildly, but compared to Burma, it's so much more extreme, so much more widespread, so much more systematic, so much more violent. And when you talk about who you engage with, it's very correct to say that most all the international systems and protocols, whether they're coming from Thailand, from ASEAN, from the UN, from EU, from US, from international systems, World Bank, whatever it is you want to say, they, even though they don't want to, they all do prioritize the seats that the military happens to hold. And so you have to have very innovative, outspoken, passionate, knowledgeable people willing to deal with complexity, that are willing to step out of those protocols to understand they need to do something different. And you do find examples of that. I mean, they're far and few between. I'm thinking of when I was in Oslo recently and heard about some efforts that the Norwegian aid was trying to do in exploring going through non-state actors. And we've heard that with some, I talked to James Rodehouver as well, who's a very, also, very clear-eyed and outspoken. And so you hear these examples of here and there of small measures by individual people that are pushing things forward. But the protocols and the systems, when you just do things as is, they will always benefit the junta. And when you talk about which parts of Thailand engage, which parts of Myanmar, I'm thinking for a moment of China. And, we often, with China, the Chinese-Burmese relations are also incredibly complex because, there's, on one hand, there's Beijing, Naypyidaw, but then there's Kunming and all of northern Myanmar, and they all have their own separate relationships, as well as Beijing's own very complicated relationships with all sides of it, and engaging with many different actors, seemingly not the NUG. I haven't heard so much about the PDFs, but certainly a lot of the EROs and EAOs that Beijing has been engaging with. And so when we look at Thailand's engagement, I have heard some confidential information about where different state actors in Thailand have engaged with various groups and had kind of deals with them, which I, as with you, I'm sure you're aware of some of these, which I won't go into detail with because they were told confidentiality. So there are some, there definitely is some understanding. And as I've also heard in Thailand from any number of people, the understanding of what the issue is from around Mesat and Tak province and even Chiang Mai is very different than when you come to Bangkok or other places. There could be some very strong rhetoric coming from Bangkok that as you start to get up north, there's a very different level of understanding that Thai individuals have. So, with that in mind, I wonder what your thoughts are on what kinds of Thai engagement we've seen with what kinds of Burmese engagement that's beyond, Bangkok, Naypyidaw.
Yeah, I think that's really important things to ask, and I think what you point out is, let me reflect on that a little bit. Number one is it's on the construction, right? I mean, the idea is that everything is constructed. I mean, ethnicity is constructed, nation state is constructed. I think this is something that we need to emphasize more because it's a process, right? If you think about the context of Myanmar for the past 70 years, more than 70 years now, right? It's an unfinished business of the nation state building to a large extent. And part of this nation state building process, it happened to have violence throughout. And violence become normalized as a means to build the so-called nation states in the name of the protocol that we are seeing so that you can have one seat somewhere in the world, right? But in fact, of course, I mean, it can break down into multiple states as well. But some of those states may consider that if they break down into one independent states, it may not be useful for them in the sense that they may not be able to survive and surrounded by all the big brothers and so on and so forth. They can get pressures, right? So this is a whole thing about construction in itself that I think it is really important that we reflect on that. That's number one. Second thing is that once we reflect on that number one of the construction and the notion of the construction itself, are those different structures already trying to create certain form of structures as well? Because of one of the things that we need to learn is that if we look across the world right now, one of the dominating ideas that we see is bureaucracies. Right? We see different country has their own bureaucracy, so to speak, to be able to manage and run the nation states. And because of we are forming those kind of bureaucracies, the question is, are these sub-states level, do they form those bureaucracies already? Or what kind of, if they are, what are they? Right? And I think that's something we started to see more and more, particularly right after 2021, that we see that it's no longer just simply the ethnic armed organizations, like what we always call them, or known for 40 years that they always grab arms and fight and so on. But we see the emerging of these new form of bureaucracies that these sub-states, they are doing in their own way. And I think this is the key. The reason why I'm mentioning this was because of this is the structures that really allow them to link with other parts within Thailand. And for Thailand, I think you were right. I don't think that we can simply say that, well, it's always Naypyidaw and Bangkok alone, right? Those at the border, they have to talk to be able to talk with many groups. And these could be interest groups. This could be the NGOs. This could be some other groups in many other forms as well. And that also may include all these different groups as well of the non-state actors along the borders, or the sub-state actors along the border. But the most important thing about this engagement that I think we started to see is that it also depends on the level of trust, and at the same time the level of exposures. Exposure is something really important because for many people to be able to understand the complexity that we've been talking about just early on, right? It's really it's really about the exposure that people on the ground they have, and that's why it goes down to the level of individuals to what extent they are trusting those people that are engaging with them. And to build that trust, it takes time. And for that taking time process to actually happening, right? So that's why it takes maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, even just to eventually convene or have conversations to begin with. And this may happen in the crossover. Maybe right now that as we are talking, maybe talking about it somewhere as well. We never know, right? But I think that's the kind of thing that's become something so important because of that exposure really created the sort of constructions of the notion of how are we going to be able to engage. And I think this is the most important thing because of, if no matter what, there is a need for the engagement. But there's always a question of what form of engagement and how they're going to engage. So I think that's one thing to say that, people at the borders, and you were correct because of, even with Thailand, I already mentioned this, it's the centralized states. But at the end of the day, information from borders, information from different provinces may not come to Bangkok. Or even if it comes, there are also bureaucracies that are fragmented in Bangkok as well, that each one of them work in silo. They may not even sharing information across different units and so on and so forth as well.
And there's nationalist motivations that have their own rhetoric and purposes.
Exactly. And as a result, because of that, what happened was that, information may get stop at some point, right? So that's why, when it comes to engagement that different groups may have with Thailand, it will really require engagement, not simply just at the border area as well, but just have to come to Bangkok also. Same thing with international communities. If they want to engage with Thailand, they engage at the border, yes, good. But they also have to engage with Bangkok as well. So it requires a multi-levels engagement, I think. And I think this is something that we need to think about. Second thing that we have to also reflect on, and I would love to actually see it more, is actually in terms of how the bureaucracy, even though they are different, can match. And matching this is really important because of, if you look into, I see it from the way that ASEAN is working, right? Well, ASEAN have an ASEAN ministerial meeting on social welfare, but the name social welfare is different in different countries. Some country, the coordinating or the focal point, it could be one ministry. In the other countries, it can be a completely different ministry, right? But how can we link up that focal points together? It is something that really important, and particularly not just Naypyidaw or Bangkok, but at the same time between the sub-state level, because of at the end of the day, in the situation or the climate, like what happened in Myanmar right now, this kind of engagement is really important because of looking from Thailand interests. That kind of engagement is really something about border security of Thailand itself. And at the same time, people on the Myanmar side also, right? If they, for example, happen to be sick and they cannot access the central administrations, where would they go to? Well, they have to come to Thailand. And if they have to come to Thailand, how would they engage? In which structure? It can be on a case-by-case basis, but it wouldn't be sustainable, right? So in that sense, that kind of referral would require a focal point on both sides to really think and synchronize their system together. The system can be different, but the focal contact must be there so that there would be the engagement in the way that's really have a meaningful impact for people on the ground in particular, yeah.
I mean, there's so many issues that go into national security in Thailand that you're just going to keep kind of cutting off the branches if you don't get at the roots. Whether you're looking at the spread of disease, whether you're looking at conflict and aspects of the actual conflict. I mean, they're literally bullets and armaments that will fall on the Thai side, whether you're looking at the flood of migrants and refugees, scam centers, the Golden Triangle narcotics, illicit human trafficking, and just a wild west of really horrible kinds of activity that's in lawless regions. I mean, all of this should have a direct impact on Thailand wanting to, more than many other countries, wanting to find some way to resolve this for their own national security. But as is the case with politics in so many countries, there's the actual self-interest can sometimes be obscured from by simply populist rhetoric that is presenting simple solutions that won't really work, but is riling people up to have support vested interests and have one stay in power, but actually work against the self-interest of a country.
I think like the simple rhetoric, particularly about peace, well, it can land someone with the prize, right? I mean, that's something we started to see more and more, right? They want to create legacies because of those different terminologies creating it. But what is the goal of what we are doing? I think that's the most important thing. And if we are thinking about the relationship between Thailand and Myanmar right now, it's really important that, when we frame the issue, it's not simply just about building peace or having peace in Myanmar, but it's about to deliver to the people of Myanmar. And I think this is one of the things that it's really essential. Because when we think about this in the part, then we always frame it in the sense of, humanitarian aid, right? Thinking about, we're going to have food and shelters and emergency aids going to the ground and so on and so forth. But in reality, when you think about this kind of humanitarian aids or even working together to deliver for people in Myanmar, it's not simply about that. I mean, people want dignities. People want to have protections. People want to be able to make their own choices and so on and so forth. How are we going to be able to deliver those things to them, even though the situation right now it's in deep crisis, right? I think so. For me, it's not simply peace. Or resolving conflict, it may sound sexy, right? I mean, that's a sexy word, so we can say. But if we unpack them as well and match it in the real life of the people, we really need to think about like how exactly people can really get out of this wording that we are talking about. Because if you look into the context of Myanmar right now, and let's say from my work, I've been working on refugees, right? Myanmar is different from many places around the world. In the sense that refugees, in fact, refugee issue around the world now today, we see it. It's no longer a short-term situation. It's a long-term situation. It's protected. Along the border itself, we see people living there for 40 years. And we've been doing the ad hoc policies and so on and so forth until one man came in and then cut all the aids, and then we have to adjust and so on, right? So I think it is something that we really need to think, something that is more than just what we used to think or used to feel comfortable thinking. And that means that when we engage in Myanmar issue, for example, we need to be more innovative in the way that we are thinking about things. I mean, that's why, for me, I feel like it's not simply just about, oh, we are building the humanitarian corridor, it's not simply just about, oh, we're going to have aid delivering to the people on the ground and so on. But it needs to be much more to invest in the people themselves, because at the end of the day, I always believe that if we invest in people, they are the one who driving the solutions. And these solutions, it is something that's sustainable and long term, right? It's just not a short term solution that we can offer. So the recrafting of this whole humanitarian thinking, I think it's really something that's really important that we really need to look into. And that would tap into all kind of different human security challenges that you just talk about, diseases, like talking about scam, talking about trafficking. Because of sometimes, when we talk about national security of Thailand, or even national security of Myanmar neighboring countries, we just talk about it from the lens of those countries themselves, what they think is their own national security, while in fact they never consider that whatever happened in their neighboring countries, it can be their own national security issues.
Yes.
For example, let me give you one. Just early on today, we had a discussions with my colleagues on diseases that, now some of the diseases that almost gone in Thailand keep coming back as well. And part of the reason because of some of the people that have experienced it, they didn't get vaccinated. And if we could have prevented it, so that investment could be small, let's say 10 baht or 100 baht for vaccinations, while we can prevent the diseases that can cost hundreds of thousands and so on and so forth, those kind of things, right? So this is why the investment in the neighboring countries is so important for national security. It's not simply just about, our national security stop at the border. Disease doesn't stop there. And we learned it from the pandemic, right? So, that is the reason why I think it's really important that we have to rethink this notion of national security. And we have to really distinguish between national security and state securities. Because of most of the time, what I see is that we tend to conflate between national security and state security. It's just for those in power, those in government to be secure. But it's actually not really the national security or national interest in the sense of what it's supposed to be. Right? So that kind of reframing or thinking, it becomes something that is much more important. Same thing with the issue of assistance to people of Myanmar. One of the reasons people say that, there's a scam issues and so on and so forth. Yes, we focus on scam, but did we know where exactly is the root of the scam? Of course, there's a crisis in Myanmar, right? But how would this scam be able to run? It also required that those people who work in this scam compound, but who are they? 40% that we see now today coming from Myanmar themselves. The question is why? Well, because they have no other livelihoods, possibilities. They need to survive. And when people need to survive, they need to feed their family. What do they have to do? Well, they need to find ways to actually navigate it. Some of them are not going there because they want to go there and scam other people. But they have no choice. So I think if we start from that thinking, that means that if we are provided for these people and make sure that they can stay, and peacefully and then get jobs and, have a legal status. That means that we are not simply just investing in them, but actually we are doing the same time cracking down the scam issues that they may resort to eventually as well. So I think these are some of the issues that it needs to get more attention when we are talking about national securities, right? And I think this kind of conversation is something that we don't really have or really thinking at all most of the time nowadays. And
yeah, that's true. And we've had previous interviews on our platform that have addressed the how more Burmese are going of their own volition to these scam centers just because of how bad the economy is. And we also spoke to a Kachin researcher talking about rare earth, and the rare earth mining is just devastating and destructive for all kinds of communities who live anywhere around there. I mean, China outsourced the rare earth mining because it was so devastating to their own communities in their country that they wanted to be able to do that outside their borders. And yet in this conversation, this Kachin researcher noted that there are young Kachins who are investing in certain lands and certain plots of where rare earth could happen because they don't have any other way to make money. So they, they're intentionally engaging in something that is harmful to their community because they need to survive. They need to make their own bread. I think that when you mention these different ideas of humanitarian, support, I'm also thinking, there's the type of humanitarian that can happen within Myanmar and in different roadmaps that can go through, and then there's the issue of the migrants and refugees that are coming from Myanmar into Thailand, which are both very important issues. And when you're talking about rethinking this, I think these are very different outlooks in terms of what side of the border it's happening on. And to stay on the Myanmar side of the border for a moment before going into Thailand, which I know has been a real focus of your work, we've spoken to many people involved in humanitarian efforts and wanting to move beyond simply just giving rice, shelter, medicine, food, water, etc., as well as my organization, Better Burma, and our humanitarian department. We have put a lot of focus as well into how can we go above and beyond just being a giver to people and actually trying to help them lift themselves up. And I think one of the really devastating realities that's come to that is, especially as if one comes into this thinking as a problem solver, thinking of innovative solutions that are outside the box, is that whatever it is you do on the Myanmar side of the border and whatever support you give, they could be bombed, they could be overrun, there could be landmines that are laid, they could have everything taken from them and have to flee and be displaced yet again. When you're looking at doing more than just distributing aid from week to week, and then next week you have the same problem you had last week, when you're not solving the root of the problem, which is far beyond our pay grade as a small nonprofit funded largely by individual donors that uses local networks, when you're looking at solving the root of the crisis, which is essentially the military committing all manners of atrocities on its people, it's very hard to imagine how you can give and support in another way, because there's simply no stability anywhere. It's almost like everyone's floating on icebergs, and you can't build anything anywhere because it's all subject to this. I mean, just to give one example, that's not even an example of building a social enterprise or teaching a vocation or helping people in certain ways to help themselves. In one case, our nonprofit managed to deliver humanitarian aid to a certain IDP camp. And those who would distribute the aid took pictures, as they usually do, and showed images of that were safe, of how that aid was being distributed. And in one case, there was a picture of several young girls and a family that were taking whatever those goods were. I mean, this is absolutely tragic and horrific. But by the time those pictures came to us, which were just a couple days later, those little girls who were receiving the aid were dead from airstrikes. The military had purposely, intentionally bombed an IDP camp and killed them. And so it's like, even when you're in the position of trying to give the aid to those who need it most, they're literally being bombed as you're trying to give them that aid. There are things that can be done. And one of the things that we've personally been quite interested in supporting is this idea of medical training, where there's been doctors and field clinics have gone and given basic training to any number of civilians, and then set them up in their own clinics, so that because there aren't proper doctors that are able to go and administer, that they can have just basic techniques. And that is a good example of how that delivering medical training can be more than just having to constantly give someone, but empowering them to do their own thing. But it's in so many cases, it's just so devastating, because whatever creative notions you could come to, when the ground underneath their feet is unstable, when the skies above are dropping, are dropping death from above, with no place to run for cover, and you can't even sanction jet fuel, how can you think outside the box to build something when everything can be taken away?
Yeah, that's why I think that I would just come in with the two ideas. With it, one of the things that I was always thinking is a humanitarian in and humanitarian out. When I'm talking about that humanitarian in, that means that humanitarian assistance inside Thailand, right? And then another idea is humanitarian out, meaning that humanitarian that can take place inside Myanmar. So humanitarian out, if so to speak, outside of Thailand, right? In a way that we can my thinking is that, well, yes, I do agree with the Myanmar-led processes when it comes to conflict resolution and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the humanitarian question, I think it's require international assistance. And what do I mean by international assistance there? Well, basically it's thinking about the guarantee of those safe space that these humanitarian, because of at the end of the day, the engagement with junta, it's not simply just about engagement just to make sure that they're happy. But at the same time, what can they give in return as well to ensure that if this engagement is going to continue for the time being, it would be beneficial for the people on the ground. And that kind of engagement is something that international community can put pressure, because of, as we see it, what happened right now, right? The junta didn't really feel much of the pressure. They have pressure, they go directly into some other directions just to continue their atrocities and retaliations against the people. So what is really important is that, well, then in that sense, international communities can go in and say, hey, we want a safe space, at least start from this safe space. And it can be started as we talk about now. What about having a hospital built by the international community, not necessarily the UN, but let's say ASEAN hospital building there. And if there's a bomb on the hospital itself, not simply just atrocity, but that's also a bomb on the entire ASEAN, the bomb on the entire international community. And it's also shown how the international community failed in that sense, right? So I think this is a kind of thing when I'm talking about outside of the box in this sense, it means that it's to assure that this kind of thing can be delivered, because most of the time, we stand always behind our sovereign thinking, and particularly in our context of ASEAN, right? We talk a lot about non-interference, but non-interference become ignorance, that we not really take into considerations of what actually happening to our people in our ASEAN communities. And now we are talking about the people of Myanmar there. So this is the kind of thing that we have to change it from being non-interference to think about non-indifference, and then really do something more with a tangible and concrete outcome. So being present there on the ground. And I think one of the good examples we already started to see is that, for example, during after the aftermath of the earthquake, the Malaysian hospital that's operating there under the chairship of Malaysia, that happened. It is something that really can deliver to some extent the humanitarian aid to people who are affected by disasters. But we didn't grow from that kind of model that we already have there, because of our thinking is always about, right, okay, who's gonna have visibility is more than others, right? I think those are the most important thing, because if we are thinking about the people, it's not about anyone's visibilities. It must be about what are we delivering to those people on the ground. So that's why, the pressure that are placing cannot simply be just pressure, because if the pressure doesn't feel by the junta themselves, then it means nothing. But if we are putting pressure in the sense that we get something in return, what kind of return that we could have, and if we focus on the people themselves, and then get that returns in the form of the safe space and so on and so forth, from there, then we can start to grow, different communities surrounded that particular areas. It may sound so ideal, I understand. People always ask me like, you are so ideal, when you talk about all these different things. But everything starts from this idealistic thinking, right? If we don't start to come up with this idealistic thinking, then it never works. And then this is a place where, then different kind of medical training can start to actually go in and do it and so on and so forth. Because for me, the most important thing is that medical issue is also in the interest of everybody. Because of, at the end of the day, if the soldiers, they're going to fight on the ground, and even if they're going to do the mining and so on and so forth, if there are medical impact, worker laborers, they can't work. And because of that, it's devastating to all sides, no matter how much investment they try to do or try to gain, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I think it's really important that, when we talk about this issue, that humanitarian hour, it needs to be more thinking more in that sense. And if we say that doesn't work, why don't we just give a gift to the people of Myanmar in that way, right? And then say this is a gift. And if they are refusing the gift from the international community, that means you are rejecting things that you are delivering to people. It shows how bad they are as a regime itself. So this is a kind of thing that I think we just need to be more creative when it comes to these creations. And just to go back to the issue of survival, I think that's, for me, it's heartbroken, because of, it's not simply just about the issue of now, it's been almost 5 years now. And if it's continue like this, what's going to happen is that we are losing a generation of people. I said this since the first few years right after the coup happened, because we are losing a generation of people that could have been able to actually build the countries and invest in a lot of things. And these people eventually, what would happen? It feed into the cycle of violence that the regime can actually do, because of now it makes people tired of it, and they feel like, oh, just do it. Let's go to elections and let's see how it's going to be, and so on and so forth. But eventually it will not end, all these different things, right? I mean, so for me, people say like, don't prejudge on this. But even if you don't prejudge on it, but if the outcome of this going to be in a way that is not going to reflect the will of the people, really. And in many areas, there are these kind of strikes that are actually happening. And people are going to continue for survival. So what does it mean to have the election to begin with? Right? So for me, it's not, and I think I said to you, it's not an election, it's a sham. In that sense, because of then it's just the show, just to showcase to the world that we are performing this and so on and so forth. So this is the reason why, I think it's really important to look back into how we make sure that the investment in the people will continue to be, and we're not feeding in to more atrocities that committed to the people of Myanmar. They suffer so much already, these people, and you see like how happy they were when back in the time when the country opened up and they can go back and reunite with their family and so on and so forth. And now they have to go through the dark era again in their history as well. And I think there are so much potential from people of Myanmar and that I've been known or encountered in my life. And I don't want these potentials to actually be gone. That was one thing that it's always in my mind. That people ask me like, why are you continuing on the Myanmar issues? When I started my work on Myanmar, I remember I met one of the girl during one of the trips. I went to Mesot, and then she crossed with her aunt at that time into Thailand because she joined CDM. And then I remember that we did interview with her and so on and so forth. And then a year after, I went back to Mesot again, and then I bumped into her at one of the events. And she asked me one question and looked into my eyes and said, "Can you remember me?" And I stopped, and I was, yeah, I can remember you. But what does it mean, that question for me? It means that I'm still here. And I'm still not going anywhere. So for me, that question, and as a professor myself, it hurts because of, what does it mean when one person's, this is just one person, right? But still, if one person cannot move on, and there's still mine, and not much of the opportunities for her to be able to continue with her studies.
They're all just frozen.
It's all frozen. And that means her opportunities will be gone, and so on and so forth. And what about her life after this? What would it be, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, so this is, I think, one of the things for me, that's why it kept motivating me. So it's not simply just about humanitarian thing, but it's about the systematic problem that we are seeing. So in that sense, to address survival, it really needs more than just Myanmar-led solutions. It needs international assistance in the sense of creating this environment. And that enabling environment that's really allow the Myanmar-led process to actually take place, to have the Myanmar-led humanitarian assistance to take place. But we need that environment. And I think that we haven't invested enough in creating that environment. Because everyone just keep talking about it, in the way of, it's not my problems, we want to bring them back. But how can we make them back when, as you said, the bombing is still there, people still experience, the air raid and strike, and also even on the ground, they're not feeling secure. Now the water is polluted also, right? Where they're going to eat and so on, how they're going to grow their crops. So it's a whole bunch of those environments that are not there, or the enabling environment is not there for them to actually live there or relive their livelihoods. So the questions come down to eventually, what should change? What should be done more? And I think that really rests on the international community. And then everyone was like, it's not my problem, it's your problem, it's this problem. The donor is not having enough money and so on and so forth. But thinking about your organization, for example, you said it's non-profit, right? If we just started to ship it, like individually to contribute and so on and so forth, maybe that can be a big impact as well that we could make, right? So I think this is a kind of thing that we need to change in terms of our mentalities. And but because of we always think of the issue of Myanmar from the state-centric issues, but we are not seeing this issue from the people heart or people's lens. We don't see them as as what effects that they are, and so on and so forth, right? So eventually, if we started from there as an entry point, we see a different, completely different issues that we are thinking. It's not simply just about the issues of atrocity per se. It become a wider issues of the loss of one entire generations. Yeah. Maybe that it would take forever for them to be re-established and so on, and eventually it's a real loss. I remember also another stories that I will encounter myself. It's when I met with one of the teacher, and then he has to become, is a he actually, he has to become a farmer in Thailand. And I was like, you were not trained at all to become a farmer. He said, but I have no choice. I have to survive. So it struck me that then, we're losing this skill of having them be able to train their own people, and so on and so forth, right? So it really required that whole thinking into, and it keep going back again to the first point that we started this conversation, complexities. We are not trying to retain that complexity, but we are just get into our simplicities of how we want to see it, how we want to perceive it. And we use that angle to just impose it on the way or the pathway that we are trying to create. While we're not in fact looking into the whole array. Of course, there is no perfect information. But at least to make sure that we take in those kind of things into considerations would be quite important.
Yeah, and I think it's not just a generation that's being lost in Myanmar. I think it's also this black hole of lawlessness and illicit activity that's sucking in the rest of the region. As we say, it's not, these things are not kept within the borders quite so neatly. And, I definitely want to encourage this kind of idealistic thinking and dreaming of that better future. It's incredibly important because you can't ever hope to achieve it unless you're thinking of these solutions. At the same time, there's this kind of damper of reality that we have to put in there, because just as on one hand you have this this incredible complexity of Myanmar, which often leads to international actors making poor decisions because they're understanding reductionist narratives. So also we have to understand that the rules-based global order that has been the norm for many decades, that it is eroding in really shocking and unsettling ways in these days. And so, I think that there's that the things that you mentioned, that other peoples have also mentioned with the same degree of force and passion and vision, it's one thing to put those things out there in words and in theories, and I mean, but beyond words and theories, I mean, really as practical things that could be done, it's a whole other thing for someone to go and do that with the world that we're now living in, and that's the real tragic part. And I'm thinking also of, like, we interviewed Ola Elvston, who's a Norwegian MP, and his words stay in my mind where he said, when the coup happened, there should have been an immediate, universal, global reaction within days saying, this is wrong, we need to act right now. And that because that global response, or at least Western response, did not happen, because it didn't happen after a few days, and then after a few weeks, and then after a few months, and the military just kept crossing one line and after another, and there was beyond statements of concern, there were no other tangible things that were done. And so it was clear that they had the whole road ahead to do. The ability for them to act with impunity with the rest of the world turning the other way, that's already been shown that that's going to be the case going forward. And I'm also thinking of, to quote again, James Rodehouwer, he has mentioned the lack of political will as being the overriding issue of why he can't get more support, and how when he goes to various UN conferences or meetings and meeting other UN officials, he will speak with passion, I think, as does Tom Andrews, if you can hear anything he does. These two will speak with incredible passion and clarity of what needs to be done, and a sense of urgency, and a sense of knowledge of wading through that complexity to get at the heart of what is needed. and they can, they can talk until they turn blue. Like it's there is a lack of political will to do something. There is a lack of belief. We've spoken to other people within the UN that have talked about how the kinds of far-reaching changes for the better that the UN was doing in previous decades, that they were, okay, there's always imperfections, there are always problems both in the objectives as well as in the means to try to reach them, but there was a vision, there was an attempt to want to reach something that's not there right now, for whatever reason, which is a whole other discussion, but that's not there. And so, with these great idealistic visions that we could put out, which I am not trying to damper with, that they have to be expressed and put out, as you did, as James Rodehaver does, as Tom Andrews does, as these others, they have to be expressed. That should not be pulled in, but they have to be expressed within a reality and knowledge of the changing global system and I think this really gets upon one of the great failures of the NUG, which is that I think when you hear their statements, it's alarming the degree to which they believe that this rules-based global order still exists, that they believe that the solution to their problems is they just need to state more clearly, more emotionally, more passionately, the nature of the atrocities that are being unleashed beyond them, and some savior in the form of an international body will finally say, oh, now we understand, now we will come and do the right thing. It hasn't been explained to us properly, now we're coming. And that system is not there right now. And with the Trump 2.0, it's there less than it ever was before. And so, and certainly as I talk about the lack of political will, it is actually not the case that there is not a lot of international money going to Myanmar in the form of the UN and the World Bank and other initiatives. Confidential conversations I've had with people that we are trying to facilitate on the podcast to be able to share more openly, but we're a guest-driven podcast. We're not an investigative team. There are still large pockets of money and donors doing lots of intersecting things in Myanmar that are not quite transparent or understood exactly where this is going for or what the aims are. So there is money that's there, but where you look at a visionary, this visionary aim of an international body, individuals in those capacities and roles that are pushing forward and making things happen and bringing a political will of responsibility to build hospitals within Myanmar that can be safe zones, to implement certain kind of changes and standards that happen. I go back again to the words of Ola Elfstein that, the international community should have been doing this from day one. They were negligent from day one in what they did. I could not believe it in the hours after the coup. And once they lost their chance, they've just realized that they're going to sit this one out. And it's been 5 years on, and that's, still where we're left with.
You are right. I think political will is the most important thing. And even within our regions here, right, in ASEAN itself, right, we keep talking about 5-point consensus. The question is, what does it mean? How does it mean in the operational term? And if you look back in the day when there was a crisis, because I studied refugees, right? I mean, back in the day when they have the crisis in the Indochina, what happened was that this has been the major talking point that diplomats from these regions would give to the international community consistently. So, and this is the kind of things, like even though you may not see things in the media, because of now Myanmar, if you look into news, in the international media, it may not even be there at all to begin with, right? No one knows, people get fatigued and no more conversation and so on and so forth. But back in the day, like if diplomats from this region would go around the world and say, hey, we have a serious problem, we need some form of engagement and so on and so forth, those might have already bring the momentums. But the question is, people always ask, right? I mean, that is it too late now to really do something? Well, I think it's never too late unless you have political will. I mean, so it's go back to the point that you mentioned that, but how to garner the political will? It also go back to the question of understanding, that many people do not understand this. And I think part of the reason because of, not the hallucination, but because of the situation in Myanmar has been normalized by violence for so long, that people get used to that. So how we can repack this or unpack this in the sense that, well, it shouldn't be a routine of violence that actually taking place. Yeah. I think one of the reasons that many problems of violence or atrocity in many places around the world doesn't get resolved, it's partially because of it's seen as being just what it is. and it's always been like that. When it's always been like that, it means that then you don't find solutions. You just let things be the way it is.
Right.
And that is the reason why, like international communities, some of which are now willing even to say, oh, we might accept the election result and so on. Some countries will say that. Part of the reason because of they see it's going to go back in the cycle and so on and so forth. And because we see the patterns, right? But we need to break the patterns to begin with, to be able to, for us to really have that wishful thinking that I was, or idealistic thinking that I put forth. So it's not simply just a political will in the sense of trying to take action, but it's a political will to break their own comfort zone of understanding about the situation as well.
Right.
Without that, you can never go above and beyond to actually do anything at all. And I think the other thing it's and you were so right, is that we need to be pragmatic, right? One of the things that we were talking and we expressed about all these different issues, we are connecting to realities, but to what extent that we grapple with that particular realities? Because of, like at the end of the day, even when I talk about humanitarian question just now, it's not technical question, it's a political question. It's a question of power, law, politics, who's gonna be there, who's gonna engage. And sometimes we also have to admit that there are also some of those organizations that actually doing some of the thing on the ground, partially because of they can pull some support, or they focus on this issue of Myanmar because of they can get more incentive for their organization to be able to run and so on and so forth. So that is not a genuine, attention that they would bring and so on and so forth there. So idealistic things that we were thinking, at least for me, it provides a platform for the pragmatic thinking to take place. Because without that passions, without that idealistic thinking, without that dreaming, without that kind of thinking or reflection at all, then you will not be able to actually come up with any sort of solutions, or not even just solution, but say way forward on the issue of Myanmar at all. So it's kind of like, I think it really needs a recalibration of our own thoughts and our own reflection. And I think you were right when you're talking about NUGs, right? And just now, and how they may not see the international system in the same old way. I teach international relations. I still believe that we one day we will still have the rule-based order, but nowadays we're also seeing that how geopolitical thing has changed the rule-based order, and there might be a rule there. But is it the rule base that we know or not? It's different. It's so dynamic. So for them to grapple with that, I think it's also demands, for me, if I were to reflect on NUGs itself, it demands a reform. In the sense of the reform of the institution itself, so that it can reconnect it, particularly with the neighboring countries. Because for me, the role of, let's say, I can be blunt here, by the way, thinking of, like if they want to bring leverage, perhaps what if to set up some of the areas in the country as the NUG area, and then be present on the ground there, right? I mean, and that will on the one hand symbolic, in the sense of being, this is a space where we are, like can maintain control and so on and so forth. But at the same time, this is something to also show that we have a flagpole of our point here, and that's eventually like allows the pocket of money that may be out there can be used in the way that people can be seen and can feel and so on and so forth, right? And so on, and then to connect the bureaucracy that they have with other neighboring countries or even the international communities. So in a way, it's not simply just to advocate for the cause of Myanmar, but act as the government itself, that we are the one that rule, we are the one that lead, basically. So I think that is a kind of thing that we need to see. And I think that with the junta, that's what they've been performing all this year. That's the only thing they've been trying to showcase, that I am in control, I am in charge. Well, in fact, they were not in many of the areas across the countries. Right, but I think that the international perceptions there need to be reshaped and reshaped, and so on and so forth. So it really, well, and that my recommendations. But again, when you look back to the way we really have to think from the international community's point of view, it really go back to the question of whether they are willing to actually understand Myanmar.
Yeah.
Not to mention to act on Myanmar at all, because of if they are not willing to understand Myanmar as how complex the situation in Myanmar are, or how different other groups are performing, operating, and so on, there is no way, that they will act on at all, right? And then they will, even if they act, then they will act on the simplicities that they take on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly, Myanmar was a sexy cause a few decades ago. There were a lot of A and B level celebrities that were, and political leaders that cared tremendously about it. We don't even have a C level or below activist or celebrity anywhere in the West who is having this anywhere on their radar anymore. I mean, I came across this, I remembered this early 2000s album For the Lady that was produced, a music album, and there were tracks contributed by the likes of Avril Lavigne and U2 and Pearl Jam and Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just like, this is the early 2000s. I mean, like these are the leaders of the music industry, all different kinds of genres, and they are contributing a track to support the freedom for Burma. I mean, this is unthinkable today that you would, that you would be able to get any support anywhere. And it was, and it was embodied obviously by the democratic iconography, the icon image that Aung San Suu Kyi would present, that we're able to pull people in. That narrative isn't there now, and it's a shame it's not, because there is so much you can wrap your mind around that is so inspiring, and so that should be in history books in terms of what they've done. They've really accomplished the unthinkable in many ways. On one hand, on the other hand, as you mentioned, the possibility of NUG being able to have a flagpole somewhere, physical space that they're able to show a bifurcation of control and capital, that's as great as some of the successes and innovation have been in other areas, so also one has to say is the really, I would say, shameful failure of not being able to figure out a way to do something like that. Or, even the suggestion you have now, 5 years on, it's unlikely to think about how there would be the cooperation and geostrategic thinking and implementation and maturity to be able to implement that. I mean, they're on Zoom calls 18 hours a day, so what else can they do? And it's the inability to do that is also is something that has to be called upon for, as well as how they articulate or they're unable to articulate their vision. And I have heard from so many international actors that have had conversations over the last 5 years with all levels of the NUG that they walk away really not knowing what they're about, what exactly they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it. There's just kind of a recapitulation of the unfairness of the election being stolen and the victimhood of the international community not doing more to help them, and kind of an inability to take in advice or guidance on how to navigate the reality they find themselves in. And so, where on the other hand, the military, for as thuggish and brute as they could be, they're surprised. They have shown a remarkable and surprising sophistication over the years at really knowing how to play the international community. And one actor after another, organization, head of state, head of organization, country, coalition, etc., they have been remarkably successful at being able to trick these actors into thinking that they're going to come in for an easy victory, and then they get, they leave with, their pockets emptied and not really knowing what happened. And so I think there's also kind of a lack of, this might be kind of a funny thing to say, but something of a lack of respect for the ability and ingenuity of the military to, and how good and skillful they are at playing this international community. So I think that's there as well. This just brings in, a greater complexity too. And I'm also thinking of, to again quote James Rodehouver, and thinking of, you mentioned the pragmatic ideas, I'm recalling how he said, and I encourage listeners to hear this in his own words, the frustrating thing for him is that he sees the UN spending mass, and the international community in general, spending mass resources and money for conflicts and problems that really don't have a clear vision or way out as to how we're going to see change and resolve. And what he finds even more especially tragic in the case of Myanmar is that the amount of money and support and political will that is needed to make a substantive change, it's not much, and it could actually happen. Just an increment of the right resources in the right direction. The way that the opposition forces have articulated their vision, and sure, it's messy. Sure, there are a lot of things that are unclear, but that with that little bit of support, they're often running in so many ways, and they're not getting even that little bit, which is another factor which leaves us stuck in how we're stuck today.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, because if we talk about the UN, right, that's another large bureaucracies that we are talking about. And some of the agencies that are working on the ground, they may not even talking to each other at all, and working in silo as well in a way. So I think that added on to the complexities of the issue of Myanmar. And I think you are so right, because I think always the case that when you don't have vision or clear vision on where it's going to end, then you have to start somewhere. And that's why some of the people would say that, we're going to start now from the election first. But the election is just the beginning, not the end, in the way, right? When some others say that, no, the election is no beginning at all, and so on and so forth, right? So these are kind of things that I think it feeded into that particular conversations of the situation in Myanmar. And because of that, the lack of clear visions and where it's going to end, it makes everyone mind. And that's why for me, to be honest to you, I when I see the situation in Myanmar, I've been engaging on this issue for the past 5 years. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in Myanmar, but I would see that the conflict will just entering another cycle. Like it's going to be another cycle that's going to happen again,
so.
and likely, and so on and so forth. So it's not going to end. So if the reality is not about the ending of the conflict, the reality is that it's going to be messy. The ending is that it's going to be evolving. Then when we address these situations, we address it as such, not addressing it as if it's a fixed, end to it, right? Because of, I think that we cannot. Otherwise, we have to but then we have to be able to think unfoldingly how things will likely to be. So that would require strategic thinking, but who should have that thinking to begin with? For me, it's not resting in the UN. It really rests in the neighboring countries, because they are the one that actually have most of the interests when it comes to engagement with Myanmar. So no matter what, it's going to be India, Bangladesh, and China, and Laos, PDR, and Thailand. So these are the key countries that really have to think about it. But I think one of the key issues that we really didn't have a chance to actually talk at all today is the issue of Rohingya. That's one of the world $1 billion questions, right? And with the situation in Myanmar right now, and this situation in Bangladesh as well, with the areas that's prone to disasters also, the crisis and then climate change and so on and so forth, where are they going to be? Right? I mean, this is also another big chunk of question that it won't be able to get resolved eventually as well. So there are many other questions that it's still out there with Myanmar itself if we don't understand this complexity of the situation. So that's why I feel like, at the end of the day, it's good that we're starting to do something. It's good that we see things moving. But at the same time, how are we going to be able to reshape this particular space in the way that really allow the general support to go to people? I think this is a key one, because of the whole thinking that we always have. We always make something called political decision, but we don't always make decisions that really people-centered political decision, because of it's always like, we're going to aim for the building of the states, nation states. We're going to have a creation of that political power, but it doesn't always have to be like that. If the situation will not allow, because of that means that 400 years from now on, there might be that answers at all. There might be no answers to that question at all. But if we reframe it to have the different question to begin with when we're asking about the case of Myanmar, then maybe we can find some way forward. So I think for Myanmar situation, if we understand that complexities and rethinking it in a way that it's different, then it might be a small answer we get at one time. But that small answers can be something that can really build to a larger, bigger picture question and so on and so forth. Because of otherwise, the international community is going to come in and always say that, even though they come in and say, right? They say you have to have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, say a checklist that come, but they don't even cannot to start having conversation to begin with. then you won't be able to expect them to have those kind of thing, right? That fit the box. So that's why for me, when we have this conversation also, thinking outside the box is not simply just about thinking outside the box itself, but the box that been imposed by many others as well. It needs to be thinking in the way that how Myanmar really is as a country, and how they're gonna be for the people of the countries, and how complexity it is, as one areas. Maybe we don't need the concept of nation state there. We may need some other conceptions that may be more suitable for the governance in the area. So it really allows people to have the living, basically. But maybe this is part of the reason why the fighting is continuing, because we want to rebuild the nation states so that they can have a seat at the UN, right, to begin with. But what if we think about a different form completely? Then maybe we can find some ways to actually have some form of ruling or governance that really allows people, because of back in the day, we didn't have this. And maybe the rule-based international orders that UN has been creating may not be suitable anyway with the world we are facing now. We may have to go back to redo the whole thing and reconceptualizing it. I don't know why I came to that idea just now, but it just popped to my mind, because of when we talk about the UN, because I always have a lot of problem with the UN system. It's thinking about it as being a large bureaucracies and without reform and there for 80 years, and it's no longer reflexive of the world. Like, for example, when you think about P5, right? Permanent, they can veto any whatever. But what happened is that how are they reflecting why it's only these 5 countries that have the power to veto? Why not any other countries that are more dominant? Or why don't we have a rotation of power so that other countries can have that veto as well? That's always a question. Can they still be a guarantor? Yeah. Why do we have to have those guarantor when they cannot really guarantee anything for us, basically? Right? So that may be another thing to really think about. And people will say, like, well, in that case, then everyone's going to go self-help. But isn't that what people are doing now, in a way, right? So maybe the way the world unfolding may give some solutions to Myanmar itself as well, and for the people of Myanmar to be able to reconceptualize their life. But I think how we can be able to actually let them feed themselves, but at the same time get protected, not being exploited by the regime or even the scammers as we are seeing it now.
I think that Myanmar is definitely a case that is breaking the brain of international systems and protocols and organizations, and it's a test case like none other. And I think to carry on in the direction that your conversation was going, and to really lean in and draw upon your background in being a professor of international relations, I think it would be really important and fascinating to look at, as you say, these border countries, the border countries that should be most involved and engaged. And if we're looking through the prism of understanding the discipline of international relations and the changing world order, and we're looking at the complexity of Myanmar, at the border security issues, at the national interests and the national interest and the nationalism of these different countries, and we're looking, and then we bring in that pragmatic model where we're not just expressing idealistic solutions that in this world it sounds great, but we know that it's very unlikely that these things are going to come to pass given what we know of lack of political will, lack of attention, other things. Given all of that mismatch and hodgepodge of everything there, and again drawing upon your background in international relations and the changing global order, what are your thoughts to prompt you to continue on, more specifically what you proposed of these neighboring countries playing a more active role and being more, shall I say, sharp and informed about what is actually going on and what to do? Do you have any kind of suggestive roadmap as to how there could be a change in engagement that we've not seen till today?
I think that for me it's very simple. We just don't see Myanmar as a nation state. Just see it as one of my colleagues always say that stateless as an emerging form of the states, and engaging with Myanmar based on the border issues that those neighboring countries are experiencing. So that means that whoever are the groups along the border engaging in that sense, and ensure that people within that particular territories or areas are protected and safe. And I think this is one of the way that it breaks maybe from like international relation thinking, right? Because of if we cannot see Myanmar as a nation state in any years to come soon, then why don't we see it in different ways that really allows the nurturing of the people to be a center. So that means whoever is the authority there, we are engaging with them to ensure that they can protect the people and at the same time work closely cross-border with the countries that remain nation states. So I think that require, and I think maybe one of the countries actually already doing that is China, because that's the way that they've been adaptive to this whole thing. They don't really care like, who are they engaging. They're engaging with all front, but with the focus on Chinese interests. This is our own interest.
Right.
Whoever groups that are in those areas. But of course, if you think about it in this way, right, that's going to be for the benefits for the neighboring states, but not necessarily people of Myanmar itself. So that means that how are we going to be able to have this kind of win-win, sort of solutions to this when the nation state is not there? Well, for this country to go encourage independence and so on, that's not their job to begin with. But what is really important is that these kind of authorities that are in control of those territory and areas, it's also changing dynamics all the time. But constructive engagement in the sense of looking to eyes to eyes and say, oh, we can work with you and we're going to start to do something. And I think it can start from small projects, like that can actually do, like for example, development projects and so on and so forth. And changing the terrains rather than thinking of, a battlefield like that we are seeing now. People in Thailand, they say, oh, they're turning the battlefield into the economic frontier and so on. So we don't need to. I mean, why don't we think about not simply just economic, but development of the people themselves, right? And when we talk about development of people, the term development itself is broad enough to cover either it's economic, it can be health, it can be education, or it can be other form of social welfare. So think about it in that way would really allow us, an entry point, I would say, for these neighboring countries to actually be able to invest in human capital of the people in those different territory and areas. And once that happens, then you hope for them to be able to build. If they aim, of those people aim to actually have a nation state as Myanmar, as a federal Myanmar, then they are the one that find the solutions without the guidance of the other major countries trying to impose and say, hey, you have to be a nation state, for example, right? I think that's the kind of things that's along with my thinking. But many would push back against my thoughts because of, they would say, like, well, in that sense, then are you encouraging the fight to be able to continue all the time because of every group will have to find all the resources and you're not going to be able to actually to do anything with the scam compound. But because of the nation state itself is the concepts that led to all the non-interference idea and those kind of thing, that kind of closed all the door. So if we want to reopen that door, we just have to get rid of this kind of thinking of nation state first.
Right.
And that was the reason why for me I felt like, yes, there might continue to be the fight, but when once the development proceed, we've seen in multiple areas around the world that when people see the mutual benefits, that's when they lay arms and they reintegrate it and work together. It may take longer time, but at least it provides a foundation for that to actually happen. And I think that will allow the so-called from the margin to the core kind of approach that in a way it really allows the build-up sort of, the recalibration of Myanmar. Other countries may start from the core and go to the margin. But now here, we may not need that. We can start from the margin and go back to the core. It's a reverse model of kind of formation of the states that may not even be in any other place, but why not? We try. We never know, so that means that this development will feed back to the core eventually and so on. So it's kind of reverse logic. But again, I don't want Myanmar to be a test case for this, right? But if we don't start anywhere, then what happened is that we keep losing all these young minds that are brilliant and have high potential, or the potentials to actually rebuild our region and so on and so forth. Otherwise, if people thinking that the solution is maybe just to integrate them into, let's say, Thai societies, hoping that one day that they're going to have the Thai citizenship, and permanent residents, whatever, like 50 years from now and so on. What about people of Myanmar? Right? I mean, so that means that we just encourage them to just escape and coming and so on. So that's why, I mean, for me, it just required that kind of rethinking of the nation states, because I don't think that we are seeing the nation states in the same way that we are seeing in the old day. But this doesn't mean that we have to do nation state one way, right? So yeah, I mean, if we see it from one way, then we always think about the pathway of fighting for independence, and then once they have independence, they have to be able to consolidate political power. Once they consolidate political power, they build a national identity and so on and so forth. That's the common pathway that we see. It's linear progressions that we see everywhere in the world. But what if we don't see it in one place as the exceptions? Does it have to fit that model still? The answer for me is no. That's why, like we can just redo and rethink about this.
Yeah. So as you're saying that, I'm drawing a distinction between the fear that some have had, which is balkanization, because I think it's what you're saying is very different than balkanization. I understand that term as meaning a breakup and dissolution of one nation states into many nation states, and that's not what you're saying. But it is, as I hear this, I am reflecting on how all of these protocols and structures and international systems, et cetera, they are all built on the existence of nation states. Nation states have informed how those systems have come to be, and so if there is then an engagement in a region where we are thinking beyond the nation state model, again, this is breaking the brains of the systems of every ways that goes and engages, because these are systems that are built on expectations of how normal protocols go. And I think, I have to say, I think legitimately it would be hard for people used to those models, whether you're looking at diplomatic or financial or relationships or et cetera, as you continue on, that to have one place, and obviously Myanmar is not the only place in the world where this is happening. There's breakups that are happening around the world right now, and they're all following their own different trajectory. For simple bureaucrats or technocrats or career individuals in their certain position, it can be a bit of a choose your own adventure and quite a bit dicey and messy in terms of how you take a system that is built and predicated on the existence of nation states into a territory and region where you're now trying to look beyond whatever the nation state model is to whatever that means, and everyone's going to have their own definition of it. And so I think this is where you get again in this this question of what is the future of Myanmar, where you have you do have so many different voices and ambitions and aspirations of what system one wants to live under, and then the whole role and identity of what ethnicity and what identity, the question of identity, which I know is also an important thing that you've looked at, this role of identity and ethnicity, where that then comes to fit in to those shifting identities, what we understand as identity, what we understand as ethnicity, what we understand it as outside observers, and what they understand it as a member of that themselves, and how they name themselves and how they see themselves. We get back to this being once again a very complex cocktail of again, to use that phrase, breaking the brains of many people who are coming in and trying to engage and trying to figure out just what you do with it and how you move forward. While meanwhile, as you say, an entire generation is either losing their opportunities or going and seeking their opportunities elsewhere in a way that they're not allowed to give back. And I think one of the hallmarks of Myanmar that has to be said is that to a person, most Myanmar people are not looking for opportunities to leave their country and go somewhere else and start a life elsewhere. Most Myanmar people across the board really desperately want to be able to go in Myanmar and give back. And it's, breaking the hearts of so many that they can't, that the skills that they've developed, not just in Thailand, but in Australia and across Europe and in the US, even though, that's being taken away right now. But in so many places, the skills that they are developing that Myanmar so desperately needs, that they cannot go in and provide those skills. That is not something that is able to happen right now. So it seems like, I don't know, I'm getting in kind of a depressing part of my mind as we say this, because it feels like no matter how forward we go, we always end up right back where we started from, of the incredibly messy, complicated situation that's understood by so few actors. Meanwhile, the devastation that continues day after day.
But let's say 300 years ago, we don't even have this system.
Yeah.
And I think things change, right? Every centuries and so on. These protocols, this nation state thinking is constructed. And it's only newly constructed as well. It's not something like what's there, basically, right? And maybe because it doesn't work. That's why we shouldn't push further. So for me, if you look back in the day, let's say Germany in the past, right? It also we see the map, it's really odd that some of the territories, even nowadays, some of the territories is enclave in some other areas and so on. But they're part of the larger, and so on and so forth. Why can't you think about something like that as well? I think that is the kind of thing that I was more seeing in the way that they can be a princely state, they can be municipalities, they can be called whatever they want, but that doesn't mean that they have to always be independent states, so to speak. As long as people can guarantee that they are safe in those different areas, but I think because of the model or the kind of thinking that you need to have a seat in the UN to be recognized by some other states and so on and so forth, and that protocol, if it was created, then it was constructed, it can be deconstructed as well. So that's where I'm from, more or less. So that's why it's not balkanization, so to speak. It just for people to be able to live their life in the way that they desire, right? And then one of the things that I always say, I always see and hear is that current people, no matter where they are, they always feel they're connected to culturally and so on. And when I was thinking about that means that it's not about territory, it's about the people. Wherever they are, they carry with them that identity and so on and so forth. So in that sense, if they can form a communities in, let's say, one part of Myanmar right now, the so-called nation state of Myanmar, and then they are linked together with some others, then why not, right? So that's for me, it's just because of we step out of the thing that it was not there to begin with. It may be the way of life back in the day that people used to have, and those kind of territory. But and I think this is the reason why the territorial dispute that we are seeing nowadays, all conflict, is because of these different maps that are drawing that is not reflecting the realities of the people. And Myanmar is just one of the cases that have appeared to show that, basically. And then once you have that map and demarcations happening, you draw on that to build a nations. You have a nationalistic sentiments, you are building up, serving, and so on and so forth in nations, but not always working. Right? And that's why we see several wars, that some of which are very senseless, simply in the names of the nations and so on and so forth. And say nation come first without nations and there's nothing else. But let's say 300 years ago, there could be some peaceful lands, that they're working all together without any impositions of this demarcation at all. So I think for me, that's why people talk a lot about areas that, it's a right to develop or a right to be developed and so on. What if there are people who want to be left behind? Should they have that choice? That's also the question. I'm not talking about Myanmar not being wanted to develop,
right.
But the question of, what if those models that is not going to be similar to what we've seen in the world, shouldn't that choice belong to them? While in fact, we are trying to expect the international community, expect them to have that model. So I think that may be the one of the question that we can also think about it. And for me, as an international relations scholar, it's fluid. Eventually, that kind of thing, that idea of nation states, because of it's not always fixed, and because of we try to fix it so much, that's why we say that because of we don't have it. we don't have a nation state clearly demarcated. That's why we have conflict. But sometimes even if you have the border or areas demarcated clearly, you can still have conflict anyway. So it doesn't matter in that sense. So for me, eventually it goes back to, if we put the people at heart, then that's where maybe we can really find some way out and way forward more.
Right. Now, another thing I want to return to that you mentioned before, you've brought up several times and want to go a bit more into detail, is this relationship between, on one hand, wanting to have Myanmar people come up with Myanmar solutions, but then on the other, having international support and guidance for those processes taking place. And so this brings up the age-old question, especially when it comes to Myanmar, is two questions really, is who gets to sit at the table, and what are they going to talk about? And are you going to lock the door and make them come to some resolution, like the Dayton Accords or something, like lock the door and not let anyone out until they come to an agreement? And how fast are you going to push that process? So this is kind of another element as to, who is sitting at that table and what are the processes of this conversation that's taking place. And there certainly have been, there have been some documented conversations. There have been many confidential and private conversations that have taken place that have been arranged by anyone from the various ASEAN chairs that I've heard about to some Nordic actors and other international bodies that, as you said earlier, there, for all we know, there could be important people that are talking right now. But what are your thoughts as to where we see this relationship, as to who gets to talk, who's invited, how it's supported but not dominated by international actors, and how we decide, how we, or not how we decide, because we're not the ones deciding, but what decision-making process there should be for thinking about who gets to sit at that table?
I think I cannot answer that question. If I know that question, I wouldn't be sitting here, I think. I would be in that room right now, by the way, already doing those kind of things, right? But I think that definitely we need a facilitator. Not just facilitator, but the right facilitator that can be accepted by whoever out there, that they say that this is a person that can facilitate between them. I mean, I think that's the first thing. But second thing, the role of international community is for that to let that facilitation to happen. Well, it may not be one facilitator, but it can be one conductor that can say, oh, now you are facilitating, now you are facilitating, now you are facilitating. So it can be a multiple facilitators working together in synchronization as well. That's another thing. But what is most important for me is that what is the framing of that conversation? Because of most of the time, you just put everyone locking the door. Yeah, I mean, they can be there together punching and doing many things, right? You never know, right? But what kind of thing they need to deliver or get at? I don't think that expectation should be set really by international community, as I said. It should be something that facilitation should lead to how they come up with what they think, but not what international community would expect it. Because of most of the time nowadays, there are always expectations that there must be peace. There must be something, a form of, let's say, federalisms. And what if one group say that we want confederation? That's not federal system, right? I mean, we see that now, that conversation is going up. So how are we going to grapple with that? So it's really that kind of, environment that really allow the facilitator to be able to use the framing for them to be able to really come up with their own end goal or the scenarios that they would like to see or perceive. And then afterwards, facilitated to walk through that process, how they imagine the process, without setting in stones that process. And I think the international community need to lower their own expectations. Because if the goal is to have peace, the question always be like, why it wasn't peace for the past 80 years, 60, 70, 80 years, right? So I think that is a kind of question. What if there is no peace at all to begin with? What if the goal for them is not come together, but just want to have people enjoy their life? That means that now the answer may not be the nation state itself. It may be some other form of arrangement that really allows people to be fed and then work and pursue. You see, so I think that's the kind of thing that the role international community should be placed on. But nowadays, because of like every now and then they will just come and say, oh, like we want to see peace and so on. Yes, I mean it's wishful thinking, right? And everyone wants peace. I mean, I want peace. I want to be peaceful.
Yeah.
Everybody wants it. But what if we cannot really achieve it now? Then what are some of those small steps that can lead to peace? What else could be done, right? That shouldn't be imposed by anyone. That could be imagined by Myanmar people themselves, and that's the reason why. And even using the term Myanmar people now is also the blanket term that we are trying to it constructed as well to capture the whole nation states again, right? So that's another thing. I think that it just, we need that facilitators, we need the framing, and that's the role the international community should play, and then to create that enabling environments so that different groups can actually come to actually sit down and negotiate and discuss. But don't fix on the outcome of that discussion because it can lead into whatever directions. That's okay. But then grapple small steps, and then perhaps this can be done in multiple conferences or directions. They can disagree now. They may not agree at all, and if they cannot agree as a whole groups, why don't we facilitate as small groups and start from ground up, basically, without say that, oh, this grounding up, this kind of arrangement, we need to contribute to the federal nation and so on. What if that arrangement is just to feed the people on the ground, basically? I think that's the kind of thing that the international community can actually do. Yeah.
The real dividing line that I've started to come to hear is among many of the Myanmar PDFs and CDMers and democratic leaders, those in the resistance, diaspora, the consistent talking point I've heard from them, which is unequivocal because it's the basis of everything they've sacrificed, everything they've lost, everything they're aspiring for, the kind of central aspiration of everything they're looking towards is that they are trying, this is the last battle with the military. They are trying to rid the country of what they see as this cancer, and they are trying to make a new society where this occurrence of and reoccurrence of dictatorship and tyranny and exploitation and marginalization, that they can finally move beyond this and have some version of whatever it is, federal democracy, or that's another story. But really, it's what I'm trying to get at is that the military cannot be involved in the future that they're trying to create, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing everything they're doing if not to overcome and finally get past the military having its tentacles on everything it does. And they see the military as this force that is constantly looking for ways to further exploit, further marginalize, further gain a foothold, that they cannot be trusted, and they cannot be talked to. There's only one language they understand. That is a language of violence, and that is a language they have to use in order to free their country. This is more or less what you'll hear from, and I'm sure what you've heard from, from all walks, whether they're engaged in the armed conflict or not. On the other hand, I have to say that a number of, especially the Thai guests that we've had on, have really come back to the point that the military is too big, too important, too central to leave aside. These aren't so, I wouldn't really characterize these so much as military apologist views. These are views that are really understanding the harmful role that the military has played over the years, but are also kind of believing that it is not realistic to think about moving ahead without the military involved in a discussion at the table. That that they've been around for too long, and that their presence is too significant to imagine a future beyond where they're not present. That's not reasonable. When I line these two views up together, these are existing on two different planes of reality. I don't see any common ground where you have one view saying that any discussion has to happen necessarily without any involvement of the military, because we're looking at a post-military Myanmar, and the military must be involved in some form because they're too big and historically too important for them to just disappear. I don't see where we find any common ground with these two views. They're both representing pretty absolutist arguments, and so, I'm sure that where you are situated, I'm sure that you have heard these views articulated many times by many actors on either of these sides. So when you hear this, when you hear the articulation of these views of the military must be involved in some form, the military cannot be involved in any form. Where do you situate yourself within these two very clearly articulated perspectives?
I think for me, it's like those who are the perpetrator of violence, no matter what, you still have to talk to them. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't want to talk to them, then that means that you are demarcating the lines that we are not talking, we are forming something different completely without you. Mm. That means that in that sense, you will not ending violence because they're going to continue doing and perpetuating the violence. So if that's the answers, my answer is we need to engage with the military. But my answer is to engage the military is not because of they are the one, they are too big, we ignore and so on and so forth. But if we think about the building of the federal Myanmar, right? So if we have let's say a small states already, different parts, their own states, what is the role of the federal government? Mm-hmm. What elements should the federal government have? Should this military turn into just the police? Or how are we going to think about it? So at the end of the day, one of the reasons why several of the military is still there in many places, if you look in the global model, right, the use of force it's manipulated by the states, and most of the time it's the federal government that have the military still. But now we think of the different form, which is, it's viable. That as I always believe it's viable, Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. But because of if we are thinking about resolving violence. Mm-hmm. No matter what, we still have to bring in those who are perpetuating violence. Mm-hmm. Because if we are not talking to those committing the violence, how we can stop violence? Mm-hmm. Then they will say, well, you're not talking to me, I'm the one committing the violence. Then they can just continue. So for me, it depends on what goal are you trying to actually achieve for the time being. Mm-hmm. If the goal for the time being is to stop violence, then indeed, you need to engage the military. And engage in what form, that's another question. But if you think about the post-military, scenarios of Myanmar and so on and so forth, and you were to say that, then there will be no military in the calculation at all. What if there are another dominant groups formatting or mimicking that again? Mm. You never know as well. And I think that's what world history, even the world history teaches something. Mm-hmm. Even if there are already regime change in many places around the globe, there will always be some kind of formation of the same system. Because that's one of the kind of thing that people always believe. Right. We see China. Yeah. There's no more emperor. Yeah. But Xi Jinping is essentially an emperor in China, unless you build something from scratch, like the US. Yeah. In that sense, then you can design the whole system. But now, let's say if the US is going to redesign the system again, to some extent, the society is going to mimic that kind of thinking still. So in a way, I do not believe that we can really get rid of the military completely at all. Part of the reason because of there are always those kind of thinking in the mind of the people. May not be the one that design the system, but the ordinary people that still see that and maybe want to go back to that at some point, at some time in the future as well. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of things that I feel because of most of the time we are socialized by one thing powerful of nation state is that it socializes people to think in the way that the center want. And because of that, the power that it's built in the formation of nation state is to make people believe in the system itself as well. So it's already in their mind, and in the back of our mind, most of the time, we're reflecting issue based on how we see our societies, and that's just the social the psychology of our own thinking, and because of that, that's why eventually I feel like if I were to land in the calculation that you just or the scenarios that you just give to me, no matter what, we still need to engage with the military, but not for them to be at the table just to say, or have them be part of the cake, but just at least, to make sure that they know their place, they know their role. and so on and so forth. And this is the kind of thing that we need. So, and otherwise, we also have other form of groups that are now armed as well. Even if the existing junta is gone, these different groups, they will likely replace in the junta as not necessarily as a military, but some form of the armed groups that they're gonna establish to protect the countries. Or unless you think in the model of Costa Rica that there's no military at all, right? But that's the kind of thing. But it also reflects the country trajectory and history. So that's why for me, we always have to look back to our own history and see how ordinary people will always think eventually, not just when we design the system, right? So in that sense, but then the world history teaches us one thing, and that was the one that I learned. So that's why for me, engagement of Myanmar military is not because of they're big, not because of they're powerful, but because at the end of the day, there might be some form that return into something like that. That's why the engagement with them is important. Not to understand them because we understand how cruel they are with what they are doing at the moment, but it's just in the way that really allow us to be able to say what the role of them should be, or if some groups within this establishment is gone, others that can replace them, what role they should play in that system.
Right. Well, this has been such a wide-ranging discussion. I've so appreciated it. We've gone 2 hours. I think we could easily go 2 hours more. That is the case with Myanmar. Once you get in, you just keep going further and further in, which is why we have one conversation after another. And this is, as with other conversations, this has been one where, there's so much left on the table, so many different threads that could be pulled, and so many other topics from your background that we didn't even get a chance to bring up. So hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation at another point. But I'm really happy that we were able to start it and get where we've gotten now.
Yeah, I think it's really important that the international community has to really support in creating that enabling environment for people of Myanmar, to be able to facilitate and for them to be able to talk and then share their experiences. But at the same time, don't fix in stone how they should be. And that's why I am the assistance that the international community should provide it. It needs to think about the long-term investment in the people of Myanmar. Because for me, that's the most important assets that any countries, any territory, any areas would have. It's always in people. So the investment in people would always and should always be the key for any thinking, any design in supporting any nation states or building or in any processes and so on. So I would just leave it there, that people has to be at the heart and it must always be at the heart. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being a part of this conversation and joining our global community of listeners. Here at Insight Myanmar Podcast, we see our platform as a space where stories, reflections, and experiences come together to create deeper understanding and foster meaningful connections. Each conversation is an invitation to strengthen the ties that reveal our shared humanity, which is grounded in a sense of care towards Myanmar and its people. And this work is made possible only through the generosity and support of listeners like you. Your contributions enable us to continue amplifying these voices, sharing these important stories, and connecting us all through the power of dialogue. And so by giving, you're not just supporting a production, you're actively nurturing a growing community of insight and compassion. So if you found value in what we share, we invite you to help us sustain and expand this platform. Every donation, no matter the size, helps us to keep this effort alive. Visit insightmyanmar.org/donation to make a contribution and be a part of the shared journey.